The Church of the Netherlands continued all the way through the period of the Protestant Reformation. It's important to understand when the Protestant Reformation began, it was a very difficult time for the Catholic faith, especially in Northern Europe. The phenomena begun by Martin Luther created, in some respects, radicals who marauded through Europe, destroying Catholic churches, hacking the heads off of saints and defacing sacred items, claiming that the Catholics were idolaters. Those were known as the iconoclasts. And as a result of the violence and the resistance against all things Catholic, the church went underground, and it did for a period. And then, in time, it resurfaced, especially in the Dutch, Holland at the time. The Dutch government and the old Catholic Church sort of had an agreement. The church surfaced then with the agreement of the civil government. But all during this time, in spite of the Protestant Reformation, there were other forces at work that began to spark tension between the Dutch Old Catholics, as they had become to be known, and Rome. There was a lot of controversy. On the one hand, there was a notion of a growing movement called Jansenism that emphasized piety, personal piety. And on the other hand, there were the Jesuits of France, who believed the Jansenists were heretics. In the Jesuit mind, they wanted to stamp out Jansenism, and with it, the conciliar notion of church governance, in favor of centralizing everything in Rome. And Utrecht resisted because, by this time, centuries had gone by with Utrecht enjoying relative independence from Rome. But it was under siege by the Jesuits. And the divide deepened between Utrecht and the Jesuits. And it truly was a divide, in my view, about how the church was to be governed. On the one hand, there were the Dutch who were used to their independence and a view that the ultimate authority of the church was when its bishops sat together in a council. And the Roman view by then had matured to the point where the Pope was the final authority on all things church, but most assuredly on matters of faith and morals. But you have to understand the notion that the prerogatives of the local church were being violated was a difficult concept for those in Utrecht and the Dutch lowlands to understand. Their prerogatives had really stemmed from the ancient days of the church, when local churches were centered around their bishop. And that bishop would, from time to time, confer with his brother bishops as equals in council. This is how the church was governed for 1,000 years, from the day that Jesus commissioned the apostles to go forth and make fishers of men. And in the first 1,000 years of the church did get together. You have to understand how back then, there was no internet, no telephone. Things transpired very slowly. Messages had to be delivered on foot or by horseback. Decades would go by. In this case, there was the first ecumenical council. And ecumenical means, in this sense, where all the bishops worldwide got together. The first one was in 325 in Nicaea, the first ecumenical council. And there were 6 others that followed, for a total of 7. The second in Constantinople in 381, the third in Ephesus, 431, then Chalcedon, 451, Constantinople again, 553, Constantinople once again in 680, and then Nicaea finally in 787 for the 7th and final ecumenical council. There has never been an ecumenical council since the year 787 AD. Now, independent of ecumenical councils, there were many local synods and patriarchates would get together. Rome convened its councils to discuss certain things, but never an ecumenical one. There hadn't been one since. So, back to the issue of this tension between the Netherlands and Rome. Although the Roman bishops, the Roman bishops had remained in communion with Rome all this time, by necessity and geography, the Dutch Church had operated as a separate Catholic communion for all practical purposes. This tradition of independence was by then well settled, approved and affirmed yet again in 1724 with the consecration of a new bishop, Bishop Cornelius van Steenhoven. And this was a consecration without papal authority. Now, Rome viewed that consecration, contrary to its prior mandates and dictations, viewed it as an illegal or illicit consecration. But Holland, or the Dutch Church, said, no, we're keeping to the tradition we have followed for nearly 1,000 years. Fast forward a little over 100 years later to the year 1870 at the First Vatican Council. And that is where the Pope asked the bishops of the Church, in council, bishops of the Roman Church, mind you, to confirm in him the concept of papal infallibility over certain matters of faith and morals, and under certain restricted conditions, and that he would enjoy universal jurisdiction over the entire Catholic Church. This notion was the culmination of the centuries-long divide between the Old Catholics and Rome. There was a vote. Not all bishops voted for it, but the vote passed at Vatican I, and the act of declaring papal infallibility and universal jurisdiction created much dissent, especially among the bishops of Holland, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And many of the dissenters left Rome because of this and founded their own independent communions. Ultimately, this is where the term Old Catholic comes from. It comes from the fact that those churches who left Rome believed that they were adhering to the beliefs and practices of the Catholic Church of the post-apostolic era and the theology of the Church prior to Vatican I. Some of them referred to themselves as the ancient Catholics. Nonetheless, after Vatican I, these breakaway jurisdictions in Northern Europe banded together and declared their common belief, and they did so in a formal declaration on September 24th of 1889, and that is called the Declaration of Utrecht. In the next segment, I'll read you the declaration and we'll discuss what it means. Thank you.